Welcome to the Sports Science Dudes. I am your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, with my co-host, Dr. Anthony Ricci. If you're a first-time listener, hit the subscribe button and like the show. We are on YouTube, Rumble, and Spotify. Apparently, young kids listen to Spotify. YouTube's for the old people like us. So, yeah. Today, our special guests are Drs. Jeff Stout and Tim Ziegenfuss. Let me tell you a little bit about our guests. They got these long-ass bios, so I had to chop it down to Cliff Notes version. Dr. Stout, he's a professor and founding director for the School of Kinesiology and Physical Therapy in the College of Health Professions and Sciences. He earned his PhD in exercise physiology under the tutelage of Dr. Terry Hausch at the University of Nebraska. Go Huskers, although they've kind of sucked for a while. Dr. Stout is one of the world's leading researchers on the topic of creatine and other supplements and nutritional interventions for performance enhancement. Throughout his career, he's co-authored more than 300 peer-reviewed publications. Man, you might even have more than that by now. 300 national and international presentations, 8 books, 12 book chapters focusing on nutrition, exercise performance, and body composition in youth and older populations. In addition, he was past president of the ISSN, and if you want more information on him, read his long bio. Just Google the University of Central Florida website and just type in his name. Easy to find. Our other guest, Dr. Tim Ziegenfuss. He is the co-founder and chief scientific officer of the Center for Applied Health Sciences. He's the past president and a fellow of the ISSN as well, and a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Tim earned his Bachelor of Science from Lock Haven University, not to be confused with the Loch Ness Lake, because I had to look up what state that was.
Come on, really?
In Pennsylvania. Okay, so Lock Haven University, Pennsylvania, Master of Science in Purdue, Indiana. Jeff loves Indiana. And he got his PhD at Kent State in Ohio. So I was trying to figure out a pattern there, and basically Dr. Ziegenfuss goes from bad weather to shitty weather to really shitty weather, and that's how he ended up in Ohio. So his website, you can look it up, Center for Applied Health Sciences. I think the web address is thecahs.com. That is thecahs.com.
Thanks for that.
Dr. Ziegenfuss and Dr. Stout, two of the original thought leaders really in the field of sports nutrition and sports supplementation. Before we start, I want to plug the ISSN conference, June 15 to 17, Fort Lauderdale Beach. Register at issn.net. That is issn.net. So enough of that stuff, gentlemen. I want to start with this since it's kind of weird because I think I met you, Jeff, almost 30 years ago at NSCA, was it?
Yeah. Yep.
And Tim, around the same time, I think, right? It was a long time ago.
Yeah,
right?
It was a long time ago. And you forgot to mention the family tree from Kent, right? I mean,
that's true.
You did your master's at Kent, is that right?
Yeah, I did my master's there, and you were there. Who else? John Berardi was there. Lonnie Lowry was there.
Right.
Yeah, quite a tree there from Pete Lemon, but I think Terry Hausch has an even more extensive tree. I mean, other than you, Jeff, who else came out of Hausch's lab? Joe Weir, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of people.
Joel Kramer, Joan Eckerson, yeah.
And then you
then you get people like Abby, and she's sort of pretty good in sports nutrition.
Yeah, she's quite prolific. Okay, because we've been around a long time, I figured I want to give the audience a historical perspective on where the category sports nutrition and sports supplementation, how it's evolved from one, an industry standpoint, number one, and two, an academic standpoint. And let's start with industry. And either one of you gentlemen, how sports, particularly sports supplements, I guess, was viewed by both scientists and the general public.
Go ahead, Jeff, because I know he lobbed that across the plate for you. You love to tell this story.
Well, no, I can tell you in 1995 when Joey and I, sort of met and then started talking about writing a sports supplement textbook. We were publishing some of that data, and you'd get interesting feedback, especially when we went to the conferences. So the the scientific community didn't think much of it. And as far as the industry goes, there wasn't really any leaders except for, hey, this, it was EAS, right? And so they were promoting science, and they were funding a lot of research, and a lot of people were buying in to scientific based sort of formulas. Now everybody has that, right? And
gotta give them credit though. They really led the curve. I mean, when everybody was just selling protein, when they came out with Phosphagen HP, and then started sponsoring studies on a lot of their products, and not all of them worked, but they published them anyway. Hats off to Bill Phillips and Anthony Almada and the crew there for doing that, because that was incredible. That, in my opinion, that was a turning point for the sports nutrition industry.
What do you think, though? I mean, this was the same time Metrics comes out with their white box. It was the first time, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was the first time that a protein powder didn't taste like total shit. It actually tasted okay. But I don't know if Scott Conley, refresh my memory, did he do any studies on that?
I mean, I don't remember. Was that the one that had metamycin in it?
Yes.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
I can tell you. So I thought it was a good, meal replacement studies in general have been really good, right? You have that intervention and it seems to do wonders, when people are taking it. However, when I was in Nebraska, finishing up my PhD in 1993, I got Metrics to sponsor the women's gymnastics team, and they came out with the Tootsie Roll sort of protein bar. If you guys remember that, you bend it. I think it's the very first protein bar, actually. And they were able to eat it. But anyways, afterwards, there was no research. I went to Scott Conley and I asked him, I said, when are you going to fund studies on this? And so he actually was going to fund a study with me at Creighton University. We received the pallets of product and placebo, but he and I got in a disagreement of what a placebo is. And because we could not come to a resolution on that, he pulled out of the study. So as far as I know, I don't know of any study that has been done on that particular formula at that time. Maybe something different, later. But and at that time, EAS and Metrics had a falling out, and they kind of went their separate ways. And that's when EAS created Myoplex. Sorry, I just was in the middle of all that when it was happening.
Yeah, and I recall that the original EAS products, they were sort of, it dovetailed with Muscle Media 2000, because Muscle Media 2000 was the print magazine that was starting to really challenge muscle and fitness. Tony, I don't know if you even remember that magazine. I mean, it was
I think I do. Yep, Muscle Media.
Yeah, and for a while, people thought, wow, this might actually replace the Weider publications, and then Bill sold it, so or sold EAS.
Oh, and then they started doing chips, and they went into grocery stores, and that was the end of the end. That was the end of the brand, right? That was the death knell. That was it. And I've seen it since then too. Some companies that they have their niche, they have, they're in sports nutrition deep, and then they get bought out for some ridiculous sum, and then the VC group that buys them out changes the outlook and the focus of the company and the brand. And then they're never the same. They're never as good, and they're never the same. So
I want to dovetail this into, all of us have actually worked in the private sector at one point or another. And Tim, you're still in the private sector. Tony, you worked for that evil company that begins with a P. So one of the things that I know the three of us were told, that once you go, and Tim, you're still in the private sector, but if you ever decide to go back to academia, they'll never accept you because, you sold out to the industry. So I'm going to go to you first, Jeff. I'm sure you remember that. And it's like, oh my God, you'll never get back to industry. Why was that lie even told to us?
It's interesting because I think that was back when you and I got our fellow at ACSM.
Yeah.
And they warned us about doing research in sports supplements, which we thought was kind of interesting considering the president at the time was on the board for Gatorade. And but Gatorade's not considered a supplement because, well, we have Gatorade trees outside my office here. We just pull off a Gatorade. But anyway, and then that warning came that if you leave, you won't be able to come back.
Jeff, I'm gonna interrupt you because you know that as soon as you put, it's a great point, you know, Gatorade, of course, is a supplement. It's just not in a pill or a capsule or a powdered stick pack. Because as soon as you do that, you know, if you put pizza in a capsule, I would say people would argue it's a supplement. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I 100% agree. And but, you know, they, getting back into academia, you know, didn't seem to be too difficult as long as you kept up with your writing and taught part-time, but it wasn't easy. I had to start over as assistant professor after I had just served 5 years at Creighton University. But once I got in and did the thing that we always do is publish. And the next thing I know, I'm at the University of Oklahoma and running my own lab and getting great students like David Kuda and Abby Smith-Ryan.
I think
And
you're probably the exception to the rule, Jeff, though, because you're an excellent researcher and an excellent scientist, right? I think you didn't have it easy. You just made it look easy, maybe because you're good. You know, in my case, I was a college professor for 5 years, and I decided to go out and actually start my own lab. But the lab was actually initially funded by a supplement company, so I was the R&D arm in a different state. I always tell people, you know, that went through the 2020 pandemic. I'll insert no other comments there, political comments there. And everyone started working remote. Well, I've been working remote since 2000, which is when I left academics, because I started my own R&D lab in Ohio, but the company that actually paid for it was in Long Island, New York. So that's really when I dipped my foot in the private sector waters. But it was as an R&D guy. But I also did some consulting. I consulted for Biotest for years, for 10 years, I think almost. I consulted for Biotest along with Chris Lockwood and a couple of other people, Lonnie Lowry and so on. But the difference is I still have a research lab, but it's my own now, and it's been my own for about 15 years. It's funded solely by what I go out there and get, studies that I go out there and get. So I haven't tried to go back, and I'm not sure I would. I thought, because I really like teaching, I really like presenting and talking to people and helping people learn. Probably adjunct, but adjuncts get, you know, they're not treated very well as far as from what I can tell. So maybe when I'm, who knows, down the road. But I don't have any immediate plans to do that. I think Joey, you have a fantastic, Joey and Tony, you guys have a great gig where you are. That would be my kind of school to go to. I would never ever go to a tier 1 D1 university like Jeff is at, for obvious reasons. I think there's a whole lot of politics and a whole lot of stuff going on there. I just don't have the patience for it at this point in my life. So I like being my own boss, even though that's a little disingenuous, because every sponsor that I get, I work for them, sort of. So I have multiple bosses.
You have many bosses. And I think what's important is that it lets students know that you actually have many options. I mean, sort of the obvious option is academia, but now it seems highly acceptable to think about industry. I mean, the current president of ISSN, Tricia Van Dusseldorp, she left academia to go work, in industry. And Tony, before coming to Nova and way back when, you worked for that company. What was that company, Tony?
That company, it's on the Dow Jones, PFE. That's how you'll identify it. That's called Pfizer. I was there for about 13 and a half years. But I had a very good position, very unique. I was called the director of health and wellness. And my primary job was to both design, construct, and then disseminate all our internal health and wellness programs to the clients. I had the United States, Puerto Rico, Canada, and England. So it was actually it was a fun job because I wasn't on the side of the research. I wasn't on the side of the sales. I think that, to be honest, the three of us here, three of you guys would actually enjoy it, because I ran around the world presenting on the subject matters of what we believe in: fitness, nutrition, health, meditation, So I'll give him some credit for that. And that was I left in about 2014. And then once the CEO that I was under changed, I think there was some major changes in the company. So additionally, yeah, they were at the center of a lot of attention over the last 2 to 3 years, I would imagine, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, tell the story about, I think there was a drug that the patent had run out, and so anyone could create a generic or something.
Yes,
to that
yes. So
effect.
that was, well, okay. So one of the things I taught was a class called cardiovascular health and pathophysiology at LIU. So I spent exorbitant amounts of time on atherogenesis at the micro level too, how macrophages, attack oxidize LDL, the infiltration of the endothelial lining, all that stuff. Anyway, so the point to that is the more and more research I'd done, I'd grown to realize that, endogenous cholesterol production was limited. Was the primary basis for how much you have, right? We're probably thinking endogenous cholesterol production contributes about 85% of your total production. Maybe for some a little less, maybe for some a little more. So your dietary practice doesn't have a big impact. That's one. And two, I think it ranges about 49% of all individuals that have MI, okay, or myocardial infarction, of course, or heart attack, they don't have hyperlipidemia or hypercholesterolemia. So you're talking they're in normal range. So what basically it came down to is I started to learn that cholesterol is the sole marker for cardiovascular disease is pretty much a line of crap, particularly if all other markers are in place, right? Mine's 285. I'm proud of it. It ain't going anywhere. So the very day, as a matter of fact, we're trying to get it higher at this point because every other marker is great. So, but the point of that is I found out, trying to get cholesterol down to about 127 in the male is probably not a good idea. And that cholesterol in itself is the sole marker of heart disease is pretty much bullshit. So the day Lipitor went off patent, when we had doctors running around trying to get, like I said, literally trying to get men down to 120 milligrams per deciliter. That was the goal in total cholesterol. Think about that. Now, if you got as much muscle as Jeff, all right, 120 milligrams per deciliter. But point to that is I was fortunate when Lipitor went off patent, approximately 2010, to be able to run around 42nd and 2nd in Manhattan and tell everybody I'm ecstatic now because cholesterol is bullshit and stop worrying about getting down to 120 milligrams per deciliter. And on closing, my mom buried 3 aunts, 98, 99, and 101 years of age, who never had under a 280 cholesterol.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Speaking of the choir, man, that's good. That's a nice story.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's cholesterol is still, people, I have a friend up north whose physician recommended he go on these medications, even though, okay, his cholesterol is 240. But I said, you don't have any other risk factors.
Exactly.
What's the point? Well, doctor said I should go on it.
I'm hoping we moved away from that. Like I said, the urgency to get people down to these absurd levels. You had 110 milligrams of cholesterol or less, triglycerides under 100, pushing that, potentially these are worthy of consideration if all other factors are a problem, A1C and, your total glucose. But other than that, everyone, if your cholesterol is high and elevated and you're active and all the other markers are in good shape, I wouldn't be too concerned.
I agree. And we always do the NMR profiles, for anyone at risk in my lab, we look at the particle size and particle number and so on.
Exactly.
That's where the rubber meets the road. I think most physicians are well-intended, right? At least I like to hope so. Maybe I'm naive. They really think that if a guy or a girl comes in and their total cholesterol is 250 and their triglycerides are 300 and so on, that they need meds. And that's the first step. And it shouldn't be, right? First step should be, tell me about your diet, tell me about your regular exercise program or how much physical activity you do during the day. And let's start there. Let's not start with the med. But anyway, that's
you're right on, Tim. And particularly triglycerides, which are the most immediately impacted. They can be changed, in days with just a few small changes. So.
Right on. But that's not sports nutrition. So let's go back there because I actually looked this up on ChatGPT. Now, whether this is correct or not, that's another day. But I've been fishing around with that thing, man. I like it. I'm down the rabbit hole. So according to ChatGPT, 90s, 2000, 2010, 2020. I said, what are the top 5 sports nutrition products for those decades? And across the board, it was creatine, protein, and pre-workouts and branched chain amino acids. So that's actually top 4. It flopped around a little bit between those, but for the last 30 years or so, those have been the category leaders. Recently, as of literally 2020-ish, it's been collagen. So, and collagen is an interesting protein, collagen hydrolysate. And I see Jeff shaking his head. Certainly not good for skeletal muscle, but it may be good for connective tissue health. And so there are some emerging studies there, right, showing that, 10 to 15 grams or so given prior to exercise, or at least daily for 12 to 24 weeks, can decrease joint pain. And I find that pretty interesting. So those studies are, but again, it's emerging evidence, but certainly not good for muscle. So.
Jeff, what do you think of that? You were shaking your head in terms of collagen.
Well, no, I hear a lot about the collagen protein, but I want to know how many studies have been done. And
not many.
Yeah. So until there's like 20 or 30 studies where we can get a really good consensus of what it actually can do, I feel like we're back in the early 90s with creatine, and like, well, I like it because I personally use it. I feel it. I think that's the stage we're at with collagen protein.
Agreed.
And I think that
you were an early adopter of creatine, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, so why aren't you an early adopter of collagen? Well, put it this way, like Joey is fond of saying, if it has a neutral effect or a beneficial effect, then why not try it? I don't see any downside to trying collagen unless I'm replacing my other higher, better sources of quality protein with collagen, which I don't do. Hey man, what I do is I put 10 or 15 grams in my morning coffee, and it dissolves perfectly, and I drink it down, then I go to the gym. That's what I do.
It must be a big ass cup of coffee.
Well, it's technically 2 or 3 cups. What is coffee, like 8 ounces a cup, or is it 6?
Roughly?
Yeah.
I mean, 10 to 15 grams, that's super thick coffee. I didn't coffee.
Man, it dissolves like nothing. It's crazy. It's like creatine, actually. It's very fluffy and dissolves quite easily, at least the hydrolysate that I use. So
interesting.
So just quickly, Tim, I mean, where do you just, because I know it's so often discussed, so anybody listening, where do you see some promise in your view regarding the collagen?
Oh, I think joint health. I think, well,
Okay.
Again, it's marketed for joint health. And I think, wasn't there even a study where it was co-administered with vitamin C? And this was a pretty high level researcher from Europe. And they showed that it was actually incorporated into connective tissue. They used a tracer or something. And they showed, and that's pretty solid evidence to me. And you can show that it's getting to the tissue of interest, right? It's, yeah, if I don't, the beauty from within stuff, the hair, skin, and nails, that's also a collagen. That's also used by some clever marketing folks.
Yeah.
Right? But that's not why I take it. Obviously, I get older and uglier every year. And so.
Yeah, beauty within, I'd need 4,000 grams a day. So I'm not going to even attempt that.
All right, switching over, a question for Jeff, switching over, because you did a lot of the early beta-alanine work going back really several years. So the most common question I get is dealing with the dosing and avoiding paresthesia. That's one. The second most common question I get is, well, why can't I just take carnosine? So Dr. Stout, what do you think?
Well, you could take carnosine, and as humans or as animals, humans are the only ones that have carnosinase in the blood. So we're going to break it down to histidine and beta-alanine anyways. So what Harris found early on was that just supplementing beta-alanine was the most efficient way of increasing, especially from a monetary standpoint, because carnosine is more expensive. And beta-alanine, when it is taken up into the muscle, is the rate limiting substrate in order to stimulate the synthesis of carnosine. So that's where that came from. As far as attenuating the sort of niacin feel, I guess you call it. There's been the sustained release formulas. Some people say if you take it with a carbohydrate sort of protein, but some people are really sensitive to it and some people are not. And I barely feel anything. And
I'm through a wall when I take it.
Yeah, well, in Fukuda, he actually is super sensitive. He starts feeling it on his lips as soon as he starts drinking it.
I get it. Forehead, neck, like I get it all over. So
Yeah, Tim, I'm sorry. I remember you saying you get it real easy, right?
I get it. Yeah. If I take 800 milligrams, man, I feel it. Now, some people dig it, especially in sports nutrition. And that's what some smart formulators do, right? They put it in there in the pre-workout so that people can feel it and they feel something. They feel it working. They feel this point, they feel it working. So it's kind of clever. But, to Jeff's point, yeah, I mean, it's an impediment, especially when you need what, Jeff, about 180 or 200 total grams of material. Like whether you put that, try to slam that into a 6-week period or a 26-week period, that's really about the amount it takes, if I remember right, to see a performance improvement if you're tough enough to push yourself that hard.
Yeah, in fact, about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, we did a study with Abbott in which we looked at, they formulated Ensure. So that at the time they were building different Ensure sort of lines, Ensure Health, Ensure Muscle, and those kind of things. And they had one with beta-alanine. And we did a study with folks over the age of 65. And one of our outcomes was, could they feel it? Could they feel a tingling thing? Because Abbott did not want anything. And so they had thought they had developed some sort of a matrix to kind of mask it. But still about 20% of the people still felt, the paresthesia. And so they never moved forward with it. Although the results, and we published them, so it's not confidential information, showed an incredible increase in physical working capacity. I think even we showed hand grip strength, and they weren't training; they just supplemented. And
Wait,
like you said,
how old were these people?
65 plus. And so, and they accumulated over. I think we gave them enough over a period of time to accumulate over, I think, 180 grams total. I think probably over several weeks.
There you go. That's the magic number, man. From what I gleaned from the literature, that's the magic number. So
if you tell someone, Tim, 1 gram every day for 180 days, you're good.
Shit. I mean, in theory, yeah, I guess. But this is a blatant plug here. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to send each of you guys a pouch of an ingredient matrix called Beta Prime. Beta Prime is something that the late Dr. Hector Lopez and I patented a few years ago. And it's a combination of a couple of different ingredients that can absolutely attenuate the paresthesias. We don't know exactly how. We think it's modulating the NMDA pathway or the G-coupled itch receptor and so on, but it absolutely works. And the whole reason why we invented it was because we were both so sensitive to beta-alanine in the first place. And I wanted to see the performance that, as I wanted to tap it out. I wanted to see if we could load with beta-alanine like you can with creatine and do it in a week to 10 days. And so I think we've nailed it. Now we haven't published a study yet because I haven't made any damn money on the product, but it's out there. It's being sold. And I'm hoping that in the next few years, we can get some biopsy data and some performance data and correlate the two and show that what we think is happening is actually happening. But I'm going to send you guys some. So you tell me whether or not it's attenuating your paresthesias.
Yeah, definitely send it over.
Back to carnosine. I think the only two, why would I take carnosine? Doesn't Roger Harris love carnosine? He swears that it reduces hangovers, swears it. Isn't that right?
Really? Hangovers?
Now, if you look in the literature, obviously you'll see carnosine, number one, doesn't give you the paresthesias. And number two is good for brain health, right? It's thought to be good for brain health. So you can take it, you'll pay more, right? But you won't get the paresthesias and you might improve your brain health from taking it. But yeah, I thought that was a funny aside that Roger told me. Maybe it was one time at an ISSM conference that it absolutely reduced his the severity of a hangover. So I don't know. I don't have any experience in that area, so I don't know.
Well, there was a recent paper, I think it was Ralph Yager, who he wrote about either Anserine or Balenine. Are you guys familiar with those two? They're, cousins, I guess, to beta-alanine. What are you guys' thoughts?
Go ahead, Jeff. I'm much less familiar than Jeff is, I think.
I
know they're expensive. I know they're expensive.
Yeah, they're more similar to carnosine than beta-alanine. And in fact, we think that maybe it's Anserine that is in the brain instead of carnosine, because we did a study several years ago where we did a non-invasive way of looking at carnosine changes in the calf, and we tried to look into the brain. And we didn't see any change, and primarily because we don't think the magnet was sensitive enough to pick it up, or that it wasn't carnosine that's actually in the brain. Maybe it's Anserine. So we don't know. And there's very, very limited information on those other two compounds you just mentioned, Joey.
The Balenine? What about Balenine?
Yeah, I don't
Are these
know.
are these like in certain mammals? Are they in high concentrations in mammals?
I think Balenine is found in the baleen whale, and that's why it's called. I might be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure that's it. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there might be something there that could be a beta-alanine, maybe alternative or replacement, or
it sure would
Well-
be nice for some innovation in the sports nutrition, category. We haven't seen a whole lot, in my opinion, come out. I mean, we have nitric oxide, right? I mean, that made its splash in like the 2000s, and everyone was chasing after it and so on. And listen, you got to be, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but some of those products out there that I've tried, they definitely enhance the, exercise induced hyperemia, the pump response to training. And so stuff like L-citrulline and a couple of the others. So they're out there. But again, does that help with overall muscle hypertrophy and or performance improvements during resistance training? Is where the rubber meets the road, and that's less clear in my opinion. So,
and Tony, I know when you work with professional fighters, particularly all the non-heavyweights, so they have to be within a weight class. I've talked to JC Santana about this, and he says that pretty much he recommends beta-alanine for all his fighters. Creatine can be a little problematic because of the weight gain. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think I consider beta-alanine, particularly in boxing, but wrestling, as well. It is my number one go-to for that reason. Regarding the creatine, because it is pretty much weight neutral. And I'd wonder too, maybe Tim and Jeff can comment just right after I'm done, if that 180 to 200, milligram threshold has to be heightened for these type of athletes. But nevertheless, the beta-alanine, because of the sheer training volumes, and the variety of stimuli, particularly the localized muscle contractions, are so great in MMA sports, right? Whether it's static, whether it's ballistic. So I don't think you could argue that I don't think there's a better sport in which it would demand it, particularly boxing, where the repetition is so localized to one area. MMA, you spread it out a little bit. You got static contraction, you kick, you punch. So the localization gets a little bit of a break to some extent. The creatine is wonderful. I think it has to be there. You got to keep an eye on it, because again, someone like myself at 10 grams will gain 10 pounds. Immediately. So what I will do is usually at the beginning of camp, I'll dose them at about 5 grams to see the first week or two if I'm getting any change in weight. They're relatively balanced at that point. And then I can make a judgment, on how much they can take. I have to keep it in there. But as Dr. Kandau and Forbes said, even if we titrate a couple of weeks out and we can leak some of the water that was held, we'll still get most of the benefit. But those two, just because of creatine and the neuroprotective benefit and beta-alanine from a supplement outside of protein or calories or macronutrient supplement, they're number 1 and 2 for me in a fight performance. I know Jeff has a big background in this, and I'd be interested in his opinion on it as well.
No, I 100% agree with those two. I work with mainly, obviously, jiu-jitsu and judo athletes, grappling athletes, and beta-alanine, definitely one that they're constantly on. And I'm not worried about reaching 180 because they're on it all the time, and they compete in tournaments all throughout the year. Creatine, I just maintain, a 5 gram dose. I think if you don't load, you're not it's not gonna change. If anything, it may even help them change their body composition more favorably when it comes to that point. But like the creatine boys suggested, if you wanted to cut it out of, a couple of weeks before a major event, you could, if you feel like the cut is going to be a problem.
Got it.
And then the whole cutting thing, there is one thing that that I've had a lot of success with, depending on how severe the cut is, that I add in, which believe it or not is HMB.
Okay.
Oh,
We're gonna
interesting.
go there.
Yeah.
Now
For preservation, lean tissue, yeah.
Yes.
For sure.
Awesome.
I know
Good to
we're, I
know.
know, I think we're gonna go there, Joey, right? HMB,
Yeah.
a little more detail. But before we leave the creatine thing, I think you mentioned Forbes and Candow from Canada. They're two cool guys, smart scientists. They prefer the 0.1 grams per kilogram of body weight dose per day. They don't think 3 to 5 is enough, especially if you're a larger athlete and you have more muscle mass and so on. So, and that makes sense to me. And certainly from a performance standpoint, we know that actually lower doses are absorbed a little bit better. Well, first of all, let's get it out there. Creatine monohydrate is almost completely absorbed, and anything you hear otherwise is bullshit. So, but having said that, I think some of Roger Harris and Paul Greenhoff's original work show that the smaller doses were even better absorbed. And by better, I don't know if that's statistically significantly different, but they're a little better absorbed. Listen, I do the same thing what you guys probably do. I throw 5 grams, a 5 gram scoop in my pre-workout bottle or my workout bottle, and I take it with me, and it's, you know, this big, and I toss it in there along with some of Arnie Ferrando's essential amino acids, and I go to the gym, and I just make sure I drink all of it before I'm done. But there may be utility to higher doses for creatine, specifically for bone health and cognitive health and so on. So that's where we know that 10 to 20 grams a day, even at least 10, you know, in the case of bone, we know you need at least that in combination with resistance exercise to show any benefit in bone health. So
Yeah. I guess the point they were making, and it makes sense that we've always viewed this from the lens of skeletal muscle. We've never really thought about, well, what about other tissues? What about the brain?
exactly.
We need 10 grams per day to fully saturate the brain, whatever that is.
Right.
And it's true. I mean, we're so focused on skeletal muscle, we kind of forget there's everything from the neck up, you know, we kind of forget about.
When we were younger, we were focused solely on skeletal muscle. Now that we're all
That's
getting
true.
older, the brain's getting more important. So right on, for sure.
Now going back to when Jeff alluded to taking HMB, as we all know, there's a small but vocal cadre of scientists who are very anti-HMB. Really, it's more of an emotional tirade against HMB, which I've always thought was odd, because when you look at the literature, there is an application for it. And Dr. Stout, thoughts on HMB, since you take it?
Well, the research actually from a mechanistic standpoint is pretty intense. I mean, there is a ton of research, especially in clinical. Would I recommend the average person take it? Probably not. But somebody who is going through a severe catabolic event, absolutely. Other than taking an anabolic steroid, I don't know of anything that probably is more potent than something like HMB.
Wow.
Funny story, my dad was in the hospital for 10 days, wasn't healing after his surgery. They couldn't figure out what was going on. I had access to his blood records. His albumin was really low. And I'm like, he's not taking enough protein. And they're claiming he was. Next thing you know, my mom sends me a picture of this product they're giving him called HMB. And then they said, oh, here's the latest clinical update.
Wait, that was their idea? That was their idea, not yours?
Oh.
Physician, because Abbott sells a HMB based product. And then there's a clinical update and clinical opinion or whatever, and which I co-wrote with people in Europe. And they had that article, and well, here's the latest on it. And my mom's like, oh, well, that's my son, who's a co-author, and a physician's like, what? So I end up calling him and talking about that. But he healed up within 3-4 days.
Wow.
And came home. So again, people who are in an anabolic environment, like, you know, lots of calories, protein, want to build muscle, this is not going to help you. You know, and I think that's where they're having issue with it. Some of it has to do with the fact that after a particular Canadian scientist did a study for them, mainly it's funny because he did the study on HMB free acid, and they actually traced it, and it went all the way into the muscle. So, but then he filed another what do you call it, letter to the editor about another study saying that, oh, there's no proof that that happens. And then I reminded everybody that he actually was a co-author in a paper which actually showed it did do that. And it was a really good paper actually that they did. But what happened was he followed up and wanted an additional grant. And they said, well, we don't need to do any more research in this area. And that's when the tides turn. He got upset about it. But the research on this, I mean, like Tony, you know, your fighters who are having to cut pretty significantly a few weeks out, I would recommend that be a good time to do it.
Fantastic. Yep.
I work with some professional football players and basketball or soccer, and when they have these training camps and 2-a-days, I say take it anyways, because most of the time you're losing weight, you can't keep it on, which suggests you're in a catabolic state. But that's the only time you take it, you know, for them.
But you guys, yeah, I don't know about you guys, but it's the whole, I guess, the argument is, and you already made it, Jeff, like if you're in an anabolic state, if you're getting enough calories and enough protein, then the effects are probably minimal. I mean, none of us on this podcast would disagree with that. The question is, does it provide any additional benefit, when and where does it shine? And it shines when you're old and you can't eat enough calories and you can't eat enough protein and you're doing 2-a-days and your appetite's crushed. So you can't you just can't physically, you know, suck down an essential amino acid shake. So is this one of those things that can help? And I think, yeah, I think that's where the application is. So it's not like DECA, like, you know, was proclaimed many, many years ago. Feels just like DECA, negative. That's not it at all.
That was probably not a wise statement.
Probably not. Probably.
So can I ask just quickly, gentlemen, Tim, Jeff, your thought on this? So I'm older, I'm 50, I'll be 58. I still train pretty hard. No TRT, I'm not against all that morally or anything. I just don't want to put it in. But so for a guy that is aging and still trying to train hard, and calories are sufficient, protein intake is sufficient, but could it have any effect on mitigating like long-term, even sarcopenia in somebody that isn't, using a TRT therapy as they age to potentially preserve lean tissue? I mean, would it be recommended for someone like me, or as long as the protein and calories are there, we should be okay? What's your thought there?
I know how you eat, and I also know how you train. So given that if your diet is 90% perfect or better, I'm not sure it's going to bring a whole lot to the table. But the other thing we need to talk about is I think there's probably some effect on minimizing protein breakdown. But again, that's going to be accelerated when you're doing 2-a-days and when you're and when you're hypocaloric or hypoenergetic. But having said that, so what's the downside? Again, there's no downside. So there's only upside. There's neutral or there's upside. So why not? Jeff, what's your dose when you use it for yourself? Is it between 1.5 and 3 grams split in half, or is it 3 grams all the way split into 2 doses?
Well, first of all, Tim brings up a really good point. We've actually done a study on this, looking at 6 months of supplementation and what happens in people over the age of 65. So you're still pretty young, Tony. So, but in addition, we give them H&B with a resistance exercise program. And so we had 4 groups essentially, 6 months supplementation and training. And we showed that when you had resistance training, and then we ensured that they were all consuming enough protein in their diet, it added nothing to specifically the strength and muscle. However, what was really interesting is the group that took the supplement but did nothing got stronger. And we saw an increase in lean body mass. Now, there's a reason for that. One of the benefits of exercise is it helps control some of the natural inflammation that happens as we get older, right? So as we get older, we're more inflamed. If you're not exercising and on a good diet, then you have trouble with that. But people who don't exercise and also probably don't get enough, like 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight isn't enough, especially if half of it's coming from vegan sources. So they would be the perfect candidate for that. And like, for instance, I have my mother-in-law and a bunch of other people who are on H&B. again, for them, it's a dosage sort of thing. For me, you know, depending on how intense the day is, I could go up to 5 grams. But to get to Tim's point, it's at least 2 to 3 grams right before a workout. And the reason I say that is because we did this as special forces, and we showed an attenuation of sort of the inflammatory response. And again, it's that whole inflammation. So that's an untapped area we haven't studied enough, but we're seeing enough with HMB that we may be able to attenuate some of that chronic inflammation, which has this severe effect or negative effect on our skeletal muscle, immune system, all that kind of stuff. So
it's kind of ironic. Yeah, isn't it ironic that the people that, you know, ISSN is in June, obviously, and so the people that go there do exercise routinely, and they probably do pay attention to their diet, but yet they're more likely to be taking HMB than the people who really need it and can benefit from it, which are the people who don't exercise regularly and don't pay attention to their normal dietary intake. So the application is widespread for something like HMB, which explains why Abbott, you know, put it in there, or still have it, right? Do they still have it in a product? I mean, that totally explains it for me. Right?
mainly for clinical. I don't think
Clinical pods.
yeah, I don't think they have it in there. And sure, because the problem is that our research study, and that's why they made it, it was based on, you know, if they didn't take it, I mean, if they didn't exercise. But the problem is Abbott didn't want to be the company that says, don't exercise, just take this product. They were hoping that there was going to be a synergistic effect, and we didn't find that.
What would you tell to someone, because this is a semi-common question I get, why don't you just take leucine versus HMB?
Well, if you guys want to read the most recent update, I wrote with some European scientists, I wrote the new mechanistic. So there's some new mechanisms. And one of the mechanism is that both leucine and HMB has been shown to stimulate the mTOR pathway. But actually HMB stimulates it in 2 ways. So if you block one of the ways that leucine stimulates mTOR and you give leucine, it doesn't stimulate, but HMB still will.
Yeah, it's got to be different. It's got to be different, right? It would make sense because, you know, leucine being the anabolic trigger, you know, via mTOR stimulation and so on, but that's not enough to allow that increase in MP muscle protein synthesis to remain, to be sustained. To do that, you need all of the essential amino acids. Like branched chains will do it for a little bit longer. I think leucine probably does it for a little bit. And then I'm speculating, then branched chains may do it for a little bit greater. And then, but the essential amino acids are what's needed for long-term stimulation. Long-term meaning hours, meaning something that'll make a difference phenotypically and performance-wise. So I was never really a fan. I mean, early on, I was like, oh yeah, cool, leucine. You know, let's leucine pulse every couple hours and turn off the catabolic switch and all that. It didn't really work out the way we had hoped.
Now, I'm glad you brought up branched chain amino acids because it was in your top 4, right? That you talked to Chat GPT.
Yeah, absolutely. Top 4 of every year since the 90s. And it's incredible because, again, I guess it's a similar analogy to HMB. If you get enough high quality protein, you really get a benefit from branched chains? Probably not. The studies that show reductions in muscle soreness and muscle recovery and stuff were used a placebo. They didn't use a protein control for the most part. So those are all, but yet, man, consumers really latch onto it, and brands do a really, really great job talking about using branched chains. So I think, you know, maybe under certain circumstances, maybe, but I don't know. I've never really used branched chains at all. Have you guys?
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was going to say there is a utility to it if you're a cyclist, particularly if you're consuming something during a long ride. You're not going to consume whey protein because you'll throw up or get diarrhea.
Fair,
so it's much easier to consume branched chain amino acids for the purpose you mentioned of reducing delayed onset muscle soreness. But other than that, yeah, it's poorly anabolic. Jeff, you had a comment?
Oh, I was going to say, I don't know if you remember this, Joey, but we funded a study, one of the very first studies when we were at GNC, and we had a product called Mega Whey, which had 5 grams of glutamine, 3
I remember
grams,
that. Okay.
3 grams of branched chains, and then the rest was whey protein. And we actually had Kreider doing the study for us, and our control was the same amount of whey protein, but we thought we're going to put in 8 grams of absolute worthless casein protein. So we did the study, and actually the mega whey didn't change hardly at all. But our control group, the whey plus casein, actually saw significant gains in muscle. And we're like, what is going on? This is
That's great
embarrassing.
science.
Well, and I got yelled at by Greg Horn, who was the
I'm sure you
CEO at the
did.
time. But I don't think, did we create that formula? I forget.
No, we never put out a whey casein combo.
Well, we did, but we left before it happened, and it's there now. So they added the casein to the mega whey after we left, based on that study. But my thought was, obviously the casein had that sustained release over a period of time, whereas the branch chains absolutely did nothing because you had so much whey. We had 40 grams of whey, and it's like, well, why are you putting branch chains in there? But that's why we do research, right? We do these kind of things to make the adjustments, and I wish more companies would do that. But
hey, gentlemen, we're running out of time, so the last few minutes, sort of fun questions. There's a craze now. It seems to be a craze. Social media, they go nuts when people start doing the same thing. In this case, it's sticking your body in a tub full of cold water or ice cold water. Cold water immersion. I want your thoughts on it. I've seen people saying, hey, it's a great way to lose body fat, which I think is total horseshit, but I'll let you guys pipe in on that.
Well,
Go ahead, Tim.
Well, they started with the ice bucket challenge or whatever, right? That was the first thing. You just pour a bucket of, ice water over your head, and then you say, I challenge so-and-so, and then the next person do it. And that went viral. But I think this, the whole idea of, cold and actually hot cold, because remember when we were invited out to Mark Verstegen's place, it was still called Athletes Performance,
Yep.
right? We went out there, we gave some seminars and stuff. ISSM was partnering up. Now it's Exos, right? I don't think Mark's there anymore. But were you guys there? Because we actually did a workout and we did the hot cold plunge, the combination therapy afterwards. And the whole idea was to reduce muscle soreness. That was the idea. So it wasn't just cold. It was cold at some temperature for a certain number of minutes. It was hot, and then it was cold again. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 rounds of that. So I think the data are fairly clear now. I mean, coming out of Luke Van Loon's lab and so on, and others that show that if you do this post-exercise, especially post-resistance exercise, you're probably going to impair muscle building. You're probably going to impair gains in lean mass. So it's not a good idea. If you're on the other hand using it just so you're less sore, let's just say, hey, I want to just use it for this series of meets that I have for this week or for this period of days, you're probably going to be less sore. It might help with reducing muscle soreness, but as a long-term strategy, it's probably not a good idea. And as far as the body fat thing goes, I only glanced at that paper. I can't believe a 1% decrease in body fat or whatever it was is even measurable. So I think there's a lot of hype over nothing there.
It actually wasn't even, they measured percent fat and fat mass, and it didn't change. What they were banking on was the 1.1 centimeter drop in waist circumference.
Oh gosh.
Wow.
Just hold your breath more.
That sounds like yeah.
Yeah, exhale less when they have the tape measure around. It's ridiculous. So.
Yeah, we actually did a study several years ago looking at ice bath post muscle damaging protocol and look at the recovery rates. We found that ice bath actually delayed recovery.
Recovery as in strength? You're talking about performance recovery?
Strength, recovery. Even a delay and a CK drop and inflammatory markers and stuff. It's interesting. We also looked at E-stim in the same study, and we also threw in HMB because we wanted nutrition, wanted stimulation, sort of like a massage thing, and then we also wanted cold water. We thought actually cold water was going to work, and we were surprised by the delay. Not one of the 3 actually was sufficient by itself because we damaged them pretty good.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So do you think you smashed them up so good that nothing was going to work? Because if there was a delay.
One thing did work because we also had them combined. So we had other groups where they're combining, and the group that was on the E-stim plus HMB, and this is the full 3 grams before 30 minutes before, they were the only ones that recovered a little bit faster, but it was still statistically significant than the other groups.
Yeah. So your muscle damage markers took longer to recover. Does that mean soreness was less? If those
Soreness, everything was delayed with the cold water bath.
is that a bad thing then if you're not as sore?
No, they were delayed. So they were sore for a longer period of time. Their
Gotcha.
muscle performance was stretched out longer, whereas the people that did the E-stem H&B actually accelerated or saw some of the attenuation of some of the inflammatory markers and stuff like that. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't seem like individually anything was good. But
What did you
again,
do? What was your protocol to get them sore? Do you remember?
squats, we had squats, we had hack squats, we did deadlifts, we did leg extensions. I mean, it was brutal. And then they came back, we did it again the next day. And then we did it again the third day
Oh God.
to mimic. And
Why'd you do it? Everybody trains like that, right? Why would you do that? Like,
well, we were trying to promote like an overreaching scenario and to
did.
see if the cold, the ice bath would actually delay, but
All right, gentlemen, one last question. Tim, recommendations, your top 5 supplements in general, whether it's for health or performance, whatever, and then we'll go to Jeff, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. Wait, let's see. So creatine, definitely number 1. I'd say some kind of omega-3 supplement, number 2, because that spans so many different organ systems, right? It's not just
5 o'clock.
Yeah, it's muscle, it's brain, it's it's heart, of course. Protein, I think if unless you have a perfect diet, which few people do, I mean, even I don't. What else? I mean, now that I'm getting older, my joint health is important to me. So I'll do some kind of curcumin or whole body sort of systemic anti-inflammatory. And I think curcumin's one of the best out there. Although which brand is the best is anybody's freaking guess. And then I like CoQ10 too. I like ubiquinol is my go-to for CoQ10. Again, there's some data on some anti-aging stuff, but also on muscle performance. A lot less on the muscle performance part, but there are a couple of studies out there.
Yeah, I take glucosamine for joints. You do the curcumin. Do you take aspirin? Do you take aspirin?
I take baby aspirin every day. Baby aspirin every day. I have cardiovascular disease in my family, so grandfathers and uncles and that sort of thing. So a baby aspirin is a no-brainer for me.
Jeff.
actually I'm going to be easy. Exactly the same, except for not CoQ10 as well. The only other supplement I take is I think it's by Bosch and Lomb for eye health.
Lutein and zeaxanthin.
There it is. I have that. I just don't do it every day.
I do it every day.
I'm the only one wearing glasses. Joey and I are the only
I do it every day because that's what the research. I looked up the research that they had on it, and I was like, because I started getting, how you guys get the floaties?
Yeah.
And I never realized that until my optometrist says, well, you're getting at that age, you seeing floaties? And I'm like, I do now, thanks. But and there's like glaucoma and stuff like that in my family. So I just started taking it about 6 months ago.
Yeah, I take it too. But I'm not sure it helps. I mean, but hell, what the hell?
Yeah.
I'll take it, see what happens. Tony, do you have any final thoughts before I let gentlemen go?
No, just some fantastic information. I'm glad to hear about the ice baths because I don't want to be in the cold water, and I need a couple of glasses of bourbon to get in it. So now I know I can avoid it entirely.
I don't know if my ticker can take it.
Yeah.
If anything, guys, I mean, we should be looking at some data on infrared saunas and all the other stuff, right?
Okay.
I mean, I would love, and I don't know the data. I need to look, but I think there's a potential application there for overall health. If we're talking overall health, I think that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, it's for me. I mean, that's part of the reason Tony moved to Florida from New York. It's to get away from cold. And, there's no reason I'm going to voluntarily put myself in a big tub of ice. So, but if we're talking about heat, I'll do heat. I will do heat. And Tony will do heat. But yeah, Tim, you like want to live in the Yukon territory or something. So we
Northeast Ohio, Northeast Ohio isn't kind in the winter, especially where I live. And it's in the snow belt. It's rough. Like, for example, today it was snowing sideways for a while, and then it was
It snowed today?
Yeah, and then it was raining sideways. But last week it was 80. It's just all over. Honest to God, you can have all 4 seasons in a week here. It's incredible.
It's crazy. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Dr. Stout, Dr. Ziegenfuss, Tony, it's been a
Thanks,
great
guys.
show. I'll
Great
be
stuff,
posting this
gentlemen.
very soon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Nice
See ya.
meeting you.
Awesome.